This is Dave Gaddis, and today we are interviewing Michael Gunning here at his house. Today is June 13th, 2016, so thanks for joining us, Mike. Why don't we go to the very beginning and tell us when and where you were born?
I was born in El Paso, Texas, September 22nd, 1944.
And what did your parents do that had them in El Paso?
My dad was with the Southern Pacific Railroad, and my mother was just a house mom. And she came to El Paso with her sister, and they grew up in Winters, Texas. They were West Texas ranchers.
Did you stay in El Paso your entire childhood, or did you move?
I did. No, I was there the entire
Go to high school there?
Went to high school, elementary and middle school. High school there. Went to Texas Western College, and
Okay. And what did you study at Texas Western?
actually it took me a long time to get out of Texas Western. I had to drop out after the second year for surgeries. And I was out 2 years. But I ended up with a minor in history and major in political science.
Okay. What is it that you wanted to do with that degree?
I really didn't have any idea in terms of using those degrees, but I actually had wanted to go to law school.
Okay.
And so I had applied, and I did get accepted to a few law schools. And I did go to law school for 1 year at Texas Tech, and I think that was 1967-68 school year. And I didn't particularly care for law school, and financially it was real difficult to keep it up. And already had met my wife. We weren't engaged or anything, but I missed her a lot. And during the summer break, I did some law clerking for some local attorneys, and I sort of decided after working in that area and just the minimum contact that I had with the clients and the kind of work that they were doing, that dealing with people's personal domestic problems wasn't going to be my cup of tea. Being a trial lawyer or anything having to do with the courtroom wasn't appealing to me. And I got an offer, an invitation from Jim Sorensen, who was a subdivision coordinator for the city of El Paso, and asked if I'd be interested in taking a position at the planning department.
Did you know Sorensen before that, or?
We were college buddies together.
Okay.
And then when he graduated, he was in the RTC, and he shipped off to Vietnam. And fortunately for Jim, he came back, and it's okay. And he got on with the city. So he'd been there several years.
So you started working for El Paso and doing?
I started working in El Paso as a planning technician 1, and I believe it was at the end of the summer, probably around September or maybe late August, 1968. No, it was actually 1969, because I went back to college after that year of law school and started working on my master's degree.
Okay.
So it was in about October 1969.
And where did you go back to school?
Back to the college, changed over in '66 from Texas Western to University of Texas at El Paso, and I went right back there.
Okay. Getting a degree, and what were you pursuing?
I was pursuing a degree, master's degree, and I had just finished up my coursework before I got offered the position up here in Corpus Christi.
Okay.
So
And the master's was in what?
it was actually in public administration.
Okay. And so you got your degree, and Corpus offered you a job?
I didn't get the master's degree. Corpus offered me a job. In Corpus Christi, I was technician, and then I got put under Bill Pearson, William Pearson, who was senior planner in charge of the comprehensive planning group. And basically I worked on land use projects, updating maps, coloring maps, drawing pretty pictures, doing research for them, John Cunningham was the director of planning for City of El Paso. And I pretty much stayed at the tech level, but we had a plethora of federal monies coming into the city. You remember the urban renewal monies, and we didn't go to the block grants then, but as a part of the urban renewal funding, they set up a community renewal program, and it was situated away from the downtown offices. And Kern Ewing was head of that program, and it was a 3-year program, and the assistant director of planning in El Paso was Bill Adams. But he was director of the community renewal program, and then Kern became was the assistant director, and he was offered a job in Corpus Christi in '72 to head up the city's community renewal program. And after he was there a year, Kern is one who invited me up to come in and interview for a position. So that was the start in Corpus Christi, and I signed on with the city March 19th, 1973.
Okay, and you stayed ever since?
Never left.
Never left.
It was a 1-year contract,
Okay.
and I forgot to leave.
Did you start as a technician or as a planner one, or?
I started as a high-ranking technician, and I got a $1,000 increase from $7,000 to $8,000.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a wife and 2-year-old and a 2-month-old. So I was in hog heaven.
Well, $8,000 was wasn't a whole lot of money.
It wasn't a whole lot of money, but it was an opportunity to, I grew up in El Paso, knew a lot of the people there, and I hadn't actually made much progress. So it wasn't until I was getting ready, it wasn't until I started working the community renewal program with a number of the other planners there, and I was funded from the planning department's annual budget. The other folks in the community renewal program were basically part of that federal grant. So after Kern left, Bill Adams went back to the planning department, and then I did all the wrap up the last year and finished the reports and did all the the finance stuff to reconcile a lot of our books. I had the opportunity to actually be a big part of all the neighborhood meetings for the areas that designated as being blighted or potential blighted area, writing the recovery reports and plan of action, and that's actually got me grounded in the work, preparing land use plans for them, redevelopment strategies for these different areas, and that was pretty cool. And I had got some experience in the planning effort back in 1960. Back in 1970, the city of El Paso decided to go to an area development plan process, and they copied themselves after the area development plan process that was part of the Fort Worth system. And the person I knew really well up there that I befriended was an architect, and he was an assistant director. His name was Emil Monsiváis. And we became friends. We stayed friends forever, even when he moved to San Antonio. This city, so I ended up being the area development planner for the northwest part of town and the lower valley. And it was interesting, did a lot of work, a lot of land use work. John Cunningham was a very good mentor. I'll mention that. He was a tough son of a gun, but I had a real good relationship with him. But with that little bit of background, when I moved to Corpus Christi, I said I need to really make a commitment if I wanted to be a professional planner and just work at it, learn as much as I can, do the best I can, or I need to decide if I'm going to get out. Everything worked out pretty good, and I did enjoy it. One of the best and probably only jobs I had.
Okay. Well, you started at the low level here in Corpus, and you worked your way up. Tell me about the progression of how you got promoted in
Well,
Corpus Christi.
It's the community renewal program here in Corpus Christi was part of a new department that was created after Hurricane Celia in '71. Hurricane Celia hit in 1970, and it was called I think it was the Department of basically Development Services. We've kind of done a whole full cycle on that. And Ernest Briones was appointed as its first director, and Marvin Townsend was our city manager. So, and William Anderson was the director of planning, and that was totally separate. And when the CRP opportunity came, designation and setting up the program, Mr. Anderson and Mr. Winger didn't want anything to do with it. And so they basically just kind of stuck to, and they were both good, solid planners, but stuck to the day-to-day stuff. So Kern Ewing ended up being head of that, and they brought in Lemus Jameson and a few other people, Gilson Westbrook, Stan Carlson. Of course, I was a lower man in the total. Well, I wasn't a planner 1, I was a planning tech 3, and then I got moved to a planner 1 after a year because what had happened is that in 1973, the city had applied, we still own the transit system, it had applied to the Urban Mass Transportation Administration for an operating assistance grant to buy 15 buses. So, if you all remember the 19 Federal Aid Highway Act of 1973, it was basically called a 3C process. You know, cooperation, coordination, and what's the other buzzword? But the requirement of the act said that you had to have a comprehensive, is the other word. You had to have a comprehensive plan that's up to date, that contained all the elements of a comp plan, including your transportation element. And part of the department, it was basically the Urban Mass Transportation Administration, the Federal Aviation Administration, and the Federal Department of Highways and Public Transportation. And eventually, over time, they became one agency, except for FAA, under a DOT, you know, throughout the country. We did not have an updated plan. We did not have a 5-year transit development plan, and they were denied the application. So a young man and another assistant came down from the FHWA office, whose name was Chris Christoponis, and he sort of walked Kern and them through the plan, and I was there. Anyway, Marvin and Ernest asked me if I would take on the project of updating the comp plans, doing the 5-year transit development plan, resubmit the operating assistance grant, submit not the operating, but capital assistance grant for the purchase of the buses, an operating assistance grant. But in addition to that, to establish an MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, to finalize all the agreements between the signatory agencies of the MPO transportation planning area, and that involved County of San Patricio and Nueces, the cities of Portland and Corpus Christi, and the Department of Highways and Public Transportation, now it's known as TxDOT. Later on, that committee will be expanded to include a couple other larger areas, to include the port and to include the RTA, because it didn't exist. And we ended up having all these meetings, and I had to actually coordinate and the land use plan was the most difficult thing, and and since I did not know the area, I had actually had Ernest's support and Marvin Townsend's leadership to give me a free hand in getting all the key people across all the operating departments of the city to meet with me at least once or twice a week. And we'd go through the city, you know, from one area at a time through the existing plan. That was the last plan was update was 1968 by Harlem Bartholomew. So we basically, with their background, their knowledge, their understanding of infrastructure and the extension of water, wastewater, the drainage system, it was a very informative process for me. I learned a lot about the infrastructure. We put together a very durable plan, and we finished it up in the comp plan, the transportation plan, 1974. And that was the first time we published it. I finalized the agreement, required the city manager's signature for the Section 112 grant, which was the funding money for the MPO at that time. And I remember our post-funding level was just a little bit over $17,000. Now, Glenn Ford was the regional head of Urban Mass Transportation Administration out of Fort Worth, and his assistant was Blas Uribe. And those guys were terrific in walking me through that, because I also had to do the transit development program, 5-year transit development program. So I visited the Fort Worth system, the Houston system, San Antonio system, the Austin system, met with all the general managers. Pinky Hill was head of VIA in San Antonio. I can't remember the name of the head of the Houston system, and which is now RTA, but it was called HUTRAN, as a matter of fact. But the person I got to meet that showed me around, that stayed with me, it was McDonald, Mr. McDonald, that was head of that system, was Tom Niscala. So I don't know if you know Tom, but he is basically a planner. But he came down, and after a couple of changes, he actually came down, and I kind of recruited him to come down to Corpus Christi, and he took over Roy Kletz's job as the general manager of the transit system. Now, our long-term plan was to sell the city's transit system. Marvin wanted it gone, and so we sold it to Critical Board, the RTA, Regional Transit Authority. Pat Eisenhower was part of that committee. Tom did almost all of the legwork on putting that together. And by 75 or 76, we had an RTA. The city had a little bit of money in the pocket, and the buses were no longer our headache. But I was the first MPO coordinator for the city of Corpus Christi and the senior transportation planner. And I recall, I'll share a funny story with you. All this time, I was working on all these plans, and I was really a duck out of water. And I was working late in the evenings trying to keep up with things. I had a couple people, good draftsmen, John Carpenter, that could help me with all the mapping. Gilson Westbrook was the planner, and he was helping with a lot of research. Willie Polito was a planner with the community rural program, and he helped with doing a lot of the demographic work for us. So I had a good group of team members, but I never had to speak publicly at an open session. I met with people that I knew from the city and the county, and professionals in their own areas, and we sat down and we reviewed the plans, the land use plan, the transportation plan, and whatever, and all the agreements, and got them all signed. But at the end of the process, we had to have a meeting of the policy board. So, and we had to create a technical committee meeting made up of members that are appointed by the different entities, basically a staffing, the key staff people. So I was the MPO coordinator, and I was the part of the technical review committee, and we passed all the documents through the technical review committee to the policy committee. So the first public hearing was Judge Barnes from the Nueces County, Mayor Jason Luby from City of Corpus Christi, Then we had the mayor of Portland. I don't remember his name at the moment. And then we had the county judge from San Patricio. And then we had the TxDOT District 16 engineer. And so I had to present all the documents in an order. And first I did the agreements, the 895 agreement with the COG, which, you know, that process went away. The designation agreement with the state that the city of Corpus Christi would become the MPO. The Section 112 agreement with the federal government, allowing us to receive the federal monies out of the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1973. The 3C agreement between all the signatory agencies of the Metropolitan Planning Organization and the MPO area. The land use plan, the transit development 5-year plan, the transportation plan, and then the entire document of the comprehensive plan, which we had to update the economic and housing and all this other stuff. It was a done deal. So I'm there, never before, at downtown City Hall council members, and they got this wooden podium right there, microphone, you know, and it's not the sound systems that we're used to today. And I'm real nervous, and the council chamber is pretty packed with all these dignitaries around there, and mayor calls the meeting to order, and Marvin introduces me and asks me to go ahead and make the presentation. So I'm there, and I'm so nervous, my right knee is shaking so bad, I braced it against the podium to keep it from shaking. And all of a sudden, there's this knocking noise coming over the sound system, and it's my knee pop, 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 hitting that podium, and it's going through the sound system, and Mayor Luby says, "What's that noise?" And I said, "Mayor, it's me. I'm so nervous, my knees are knocking up against the podium." And everybody just broke out laughing. And from that point on, I was comfortable. It just took all the tension away. And we presented all the documents, and when it was all over, I told Marvin, I said, well, Marvin asked me what was next, what's the next step? And I said, well, you need to hire yourself a senior MPO coordinator and transportation planner. And then 2 days later, I got called in, and I jumped from a planning tech to a senior planner. A transportation planner, to make it distinguished from the other planners. And from 1974 to 1985, I was the MPO coordinator,
Okay.
7 years, transportation planner.
And other than just maintaining the plan, were there any other special projects while you're doing the?
No, that was pretty much
work?
full time. I did the, part of the things that our funding got increased every year, and I had some opportunities as our funding increased, so, you know, from 17,000, 74,000 to 120,000. I set up a program to bring in interns from 3 interns every summer. And so I worked through UT Arlington, UT Austin, and Texas A&M College, because they're the only schools that had master programs in urban regional planning. And for years, I brought these students in. I had some really good students that worked, and they were in the final year. They were graduating, and the internship was part of the requirement. And the nice thing was that I was paying them sort of a decent wage that they could actually live in. The majority of our students came from Texas A&M. One came from UT Arlington, and several came from UT Austin.
Any of those interns stand out to you?
Several. Steve Ortman, Ralph Cognes. Ralph ended up being city manager up in Illinois, the director of planning. Steve Ortman ended up heading up a big consulting practice transportation program with it. He was one of the senior level consultants with that firm up in Austin, and they were looking at the light rail system. And there was a lot of notable ones. Lamont Taylor, got him out of Trinity, but he was a local kid. He came back and he worked for me several years. He worked with, I had him, he was doing the transit planning for us. And so he was working with Tom. And Lamont stayed with the RTA when it switched over, and he just recently retired. Now he's part of the, he's on the regional the RTA board of directors. Okay. Barbara Black, who's a graduate of Trinity, and she came down and she was at the age of 50 years old, and she worked for me for 3 years, and she was really a sharp lady. And she was back to being single. That's why she went back to work, went back and got her degree, her master's degree in planning from Trinity. And she was real sharp. And, you know, and I told Barbara, you're too, you know, you can go a long way. But with the city here and considering, you know, there's not that many openings and whatever, you need to expand your horizons and look elsewhere. And she did. And we went to law school, got her law degree, and now she just retired after a 25-year career as leading as the administrative head of the federal bankruptcy court for this region. Impressive for that lady.
So you worked with the MPO till you said about 85?
85,
or so?
yeah.
And then what happened then? Did you get transferred within the department? Or?
I did. Actually, it was a transition, 84 to 85. We had a new city manager that came on after Ed Martin. His name was McDowell. And I actually never in his whole term had a one-on meeting with him. And I've been chewed out by the best of the city managers, but he made the decision, and it wasn't a bad decision, but he wanted to create a Department of Transportation and put transportation and MPO and traffic engineering, you know, and all single department. And Tom Stewart became the head of that, and Mary Frances Teniente became the new MPO coordinator. It was out of my hands. So then I went into special projects because Larry Wenger didn't know what to do with me. And I thought that was the death knell, you know, when you get pushed into special projects. You have to remember, no one ever said anything directly to me, but there was a lot of resentment when I jumped from Tech 3 to senior planner. And there was a lot of resentment that we were doing all the planning in the CR under the auspices of the Community Renewal Program. But the planning department should have been doing that. But Mr. Anderson didn't want anything to do with it. Mr. Anderson, however, was a big help to me in working with the plans, by the way. He was a great guy. And Larry was a big help too. Larry is a super guy. You knew Larry, didn't you? Yeah. They're all good. And so in 74, we also, or 75, our community renewal program was shutting down. Kern took another job somewhere, and I'm not sure where it was. He left. Linus Jameson stayed with us, and she became the senior comprehensive planner over there with the, they moved the remaining staff in with the planning department, including me. And I had an option. Ernest said, we can create a MPO transportation planning department and put the transit, and Marvin had talked to me about taking over the transit system, and General I didn't want anything to do with that. I wasn't mature enough to handle dealing with those drivers and stuff like that. But so I actually got absorbed into the Department of Planning and Research. I became basically a division head in charge of transportation. I had an office over in the transit building where, I visited. I had employees. I had like 5 or 6 employees over there I supervised, and I had about 4 or 5, 6 working for me. And there was a little jealousy. And Bruce McClendon came on board, and he was a little bit later on, and he was the comp planning. And Bruce was, he was a guy you could really learn from. And I wish I had an opportunity to work closer with him, and because he was a good mentor. He was good with all, but I did coordinate the planning and transportation plans with the comp planning with their region. And Bruce is so fast. You ever realize how fast that guy can write out something and produce a product? It's something else. So I was sort of left out of left field when my transportation gig and the funding and everything went away. And so I was working on special projects. I did an apartment survey. I did a little neighborhood study, and just whatever Larry could find for me to do. I was just sort of like a gopher. But he had put his main guy that was after Bob Shaw had retired. He brought in Gary Dumas, became head of what he called the Ordinance Administration Group, which oversaw the subdivision, plating, and the zoning of all properties, zoning board of adjustment, landmark commission. All of that was part of that ordinance administration. And so he put when Gary left to take a job up in Idaho or somewhere up in Iowa, he put one of the other senior people in that position. They tried it, and there's a lot of deadlines with that job, statutory deadlines, directed by the state, and not as well as your local deadlines. You can't miss deadlines. If a zoning case doesn't get the public notice out for 72 hours in advance before the public hearing, then it doesn't go on the public hearing. And all of a sudden, the property owner is really angry at you. And they finally gave me a shot out of desperation, and I stayed. It was the biggest thing for me. And then Larry retired in 1988 when we moved over to New City Hall. But one of the things I always tell people that I mentor them, I did this in El Paso because John Cunningham told me to do it. He said, expand your knowledge and learn as much as you can about planning, and you got some real good people here, Ivan Hall, Bill Pearson, Bill Adams, himself, to rely on to get some planning. And Bill Adams wasn't that great of a help, but the others really were. But look at everything else, all the other regulatory functions that affect the department in terms of capital improvement process, the capital budget, the basic requirements for extending water lines, size of water lines, sanitary sewer lines, drainage systems, so to get an idea of the basic type of infrastructure and the size of the infrastructure that's needed to support certain levels of development. So I honed a lot of knowledge just from people and working with a lot of engineers on understanding the infrastructure process. One of the key projects that got me I did get a promotion opportunity when I already accepted the job, but I had just finished preparing a community facilities inventory, which was very comprehensive. It covered everything that ought to be in a capital of CIP, and this was a 3-year project, but we extended it to a 5-year project, and we covered everything from all of the infrastructure to even public buildings to major pieces of equipment like a fire engine, but anything that at that time in 71, 72, 73, at that time, everything was valued over $100,000. It was considered a capital improvement. I mean, it wouldn't make a list. That's spending money today. I took the same approach when I came in the city of Corpus Christi. I went to planning commission meetings when I didn't have to. Didn't miss them. I read and memorized the zoning codes, the subdivision regulations, and anything that had to do with planning and I didn't have to. But I find myself, when people would take vacation for Christmas and stuff like that, and I'd still be around, I told Larry, I said, send some people here, I can help them out. He said, you know these codes? Better than some of your ordinance administration staff. And I did. And so I felt comfortable when I took over that, and I stayed with it as we moved over to the new city hall. I'd lost the senior transportation title to just to the senior city planner. And so from 88 to 98, I was working ordinance administration as senior planner, but it was good experience and it was hard work.
And at 98 then?
98, I was appointed director.
Okay.
Actually, I was appointed the acting director in 98. Randall Harvey was fired on Good Friday, and by Bill Hennings. Got called up on a Friday, and Brandon and I talked a little bit, and he let me know that Bill had decided it was time to split. They had different philosophies. Brandon was a really sharp guy. He was a tough guy to work with, but he was very sharp. And that Monday, I was appointed acting director, interim director, whatever. And then Bill didn't want me to. He did not want to appoint. He did not want to appoint me as a full-time planning director. They wanted to, but he knew he'd be leaving after the end of the budget year. And when he knew for sure he was leaving, he thought about it, doing that, appointing me the director, but he just left it. And so I worked under Bill for about 6, 7 months, 8 months through the budgeting process. I had to handle the department's budget and everything, and then new manager came on, David Garcia. So he advertised for the position nationwide, and it had been advertised nationwide, and by the time David got situated and got around to the applicants, he said it was really too late. These applications are kind of old now. A lot of the people that had interested in coming to Corpus Christi were no longer available. They got settled in somewhere else, so we advertised. And he had 5 people he brought in for an interview from east to west coast, and I did well. I got the nod from David Garcia, and he and I were good friends till he left.
You mentioned Brandel, and I hadn't thought about Brandel in years. Was there any directors before Brandel, between Brandel and?
There was an interim director, Mickey Rosh.
Okay.
After Larry Winger left, Mick was put acting in charge, and then Brandel came on latter part, very late in 88.
Okay. So you became director in the 90s, and then you retired in?
I retired January 5th, 2007.
Okay.
In 2001, the big movement in this state was for planning or development, permitting process, one-stop shop. That was a new buzzword, right? And I actually known quite a bit about it, but we were going to do that. Some of the council members wanted to make sure that we had that process in there. And so we visited cities. There was task force, a couple of council members on it, a couple of local community people were on that, and we visited a around the state. We went to Fort Worth, Houston, and San Antonio. And then we put together our own. We actually brought in Paul Zucker on a very limited contract to do a work session with us. He was here for about a week. And we put it together. It was too haphazard. There wasn't enough study done. There wasn't enough money committed, and it's been a problem ever since. It's been a problem coordinating, getting on track with the developers, keeping everybody informed with the deadlines, and also a couple of other things happened is when we finally created the department. There was a building that they're in right now, which was occupied by that the fire department moved in, and they occupy the second, third, and fourth floors, and that's over there off Port Avenue and Leopard, in that area. And we had the first floor, and Art Sosa was our first acting director of development services, and David appointed me as the assistant director, no acting to it, of development services, but he let me keep my title as director of planning. Brando was advertising for an assistant director of planning before he got canned. And I was interested in it. Well, I was actually supervising the secretarial staff and a lot of other projects, and so I was, I didn't want to be shut down. And I said, and anyway, he advertised it, and he said AICP required, and I didn't have it, so I applied for the AICP and paid for it myself. No, the city he paid for it, but I paid for it, and then they would reimburse me if I passed it. And he said, well, you probably won't pass it the first time. But I did. I was the only one of 5 people from the area to take it. I never got to study, because after I finally got accepted, qualified to take the exam, Brandel's left, and I was in charge as acting director, and I had too much on the table to begin studying. But as I told you before, I learned what I can. I kept up with all the planning materials, the planning magazines, and I read all the histories. So I didn't have a formal education in planning, but I knew what they were studying and what there was needed, so I studied all the same things just to get a good grounding in it. Plus, I had a really strong background in transportation systems. So I went up to San Antonio, and had lunch with my son Doxa was living there, and I was gonna, took an armful of papers and books. And I finally got into the room. It was a nice hotel room, and I just put them on the side, and I paid for that too. And I said, heck with that. I went out and bought myself a pizza, 6-pack of beer, watched a couple of movies, went to bed early, got up, went down to the University of St. Mary's, I think, took the exam, felt really good, and went home. And then later on, I found I got, I passed. Not by much, 81, 80, or something like that.
Nobody cares once you pass.
So that was a neat story for me.
Well, you brought up AICP. When did you first get involved in APA, or were you involved in AIP or ASPO before?
I was involved not as a member. Actually, I was. I did join the American Society of Planning Officials. Mm-hmm. And I did that when I moved to Corpus Christi. And even all those years, and that's what kind of bothered me about El Paso. And all those years in El Paso, John, AIP didn't exist. It was the American Institute of Planners, but there was 2 associations that merged to become the American Planning Association. One was the American Society of Planning Officials,
and AIP.
American Institute of Planners.
Right.
Okay. And John said, "Well, you got to be certified to be an AIP member, but you can join ASPO." I found later on that you really didn't. There was another membership status. And I thought they didn't do a good job of promoting AIP. Anyway, Kern and Lennis encouraged me to join AIP. So I joined about, I don't know, 74, 75.
Okay.
Just as a member. And so I was a member all the time, the head of the southmost section a couple
Well, I was
times.
going to ask you about your involvement in the section. You were section director.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did you ever do much at the chapter level?
No, I actually never got the opportunity at chapter level. I was too nervous. You guys were too smart. But only to the extent that as section director, I had a spot at the table.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, and you also hosted a few conferences.
We did. We had Bruce was the section director, and he always did a really good job. So when he left, I was the next section director, and I was section director, I guess, for 2 terms.
Okay.
And I think Richard Bullock did it. Richard was a big. We had a pretty active southmost section, and we had quite a few members and people from the valley come up. We had some good sessions. I was section director when we hosted the chapter conference at the Holiday Emerald Beach, and we brought in Henry Cisneros from San Antonio to be our speaker. I was the section director and headed up the conference when we had it on North Beach. No, Bruce McClendon was the section director then, but I was heavily involved in that conference. Bruce McClendon, I was head of the transportation planning part. And then the last conference that I handled, we had one out on Padre Island, and I don't remember if Bruce was with us at that time. And it may have been that Richard Bullock was section director then, but I remember, but we did as a section hosted one out on Island. But I was section director when we hosted the meeting over in Port Aransas. And that was a crazy meeting because we had multiple hotels up and down the beach, and it was pretty packed. A lot of food, too much drink available.
You mentioned that there were quite a few people involved in the section. Do you remember some of the people that you worked with in the section from other cities, or?
I'd have to give it some thought. One of the things, we had a number of planners. Mick Ross was a part of it. Bob Payne later on was they were active in it. But we actually had Willie Polito and let's see, Gilson Westbrook, Linus Jameson. She had left after a while. She actually took a position up in Arizona or Denver or something like that. And Kern up in full professor up there in Washington, State.
Well, you've talked a little bit about who your mentors were. Is there anybody that you want to mention that you may not have mentioned already in terms of who you considered mentored you, particularly in your early career?
In my early career, I think William Pearson. I don't think the mentors I mentioned are still alive, but
No, that's okay.
Mr. Hall and obviously John Cunningham. Then obviously Kern Ewing. He was a big help.
The other side of that question is any proteges or people that you have mentored that you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, I already mentioned them in terms of they may not have stayed in planning, but they stayed in planning really related fields, other than Barbara, who became an attorney, But, sometimes you lose some, whatever.
Sometimes you got to let them go to grow, right?
I guess right now I'm most proud of my daughter coming back and following in my footsteps.
Well, let's talk about, you want to talk about your family and what your kids are doing, in particular your daughter?
Well, let's see. Did I start from the little? My daughter is oh, by the way, the comment about her being offered the assistant director position, that's confidential.
Except it is on tape now.
Well, maybe it won't. I don't know what she's decided.
Well, we'll drag our feet before we post it, so.
No, that's going to be tough. But anyway, the right people won't see it. The local people won't see it anyway. They're going to YouTube.
So I assume these are pictures of your retirement party?
Oh yeah, I was going to show you that. I had good relations, and this is our Elizabeth, our architect, and was one of the chairmen on the planning commission. Elizabeth Richter. She used to, actually, I think she is the president of the AIA nationally right now.
Okay.
Okay. This is the retirement party. Angel Escobar, and he was the director assistant.
You don't wear a coat and tie very much anymore?
I do this, but not too much. When I go to the council members, I will. I still go to the council meeting. Angel Escobar passed away a couple of years ago, and he was city manager when he left. There's my biggest reason I succeed right there, my wife, Delia.
Okay. And you met in El Paso?
We met in El Paso. She's born there also.
Did you meet her in school or at work?
Actually, I knew her brother in college, and she was in high school. And I got in the bind on some term papers. You ever have to do term papers?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so
So
and this is here's our acting city manager right now, Margie Rose, who came in later on and was my boss as an assistant city manager. My department was part of her group. And she's still with the city. Our city manager just resigned.
So. We've heard that.
So this is my son, Joaquin, who's a civil engineer, and he is a visionary. Good guy. He can put together some wonderful projects other than just being an engineer. So I'm actually very proud of him, and he hopes to move it into that area.
Well, you mentioned that you had 6 kids in all?
Yes. So Annika graduated from Brown, and she came back, and when she come back for the summer, she did some work for the local lady here who did a lot of outreach and coordination of public meetings and stuff like that, Leah Oliveri and Associates. And when she graduated from Brown University, she took an amazing trip upon graduation. She joined a Habitat for Humanity, a bunch of students from the college that graduated to go on a bike ride for Habitat for Humanity from Providence, Rhode Island to San Francisco. And they did, and there was 30 kids that went on that. And then she came back, when she came back to Corpus Christi, she worked again for Leah. And then I encouraged her to apply for the position at and she had done one of the summers she did some interning with my department after I retired. And the city hired me back as a consultant. I didn't tell you, but I'm the one who put together the money, the funding to combine all of our codes into a unified development code. And it was this man right here that helped me sell it because the only people that had money was the engineering, was the water department from the water revenues. So we put together a little bit under $200,000 for the project, and we used it as that was including a match from Community Development Block Grant that the Planning Commission and Council recommended. So we took $50,000 of that from the Community Development Block Grant one year, and then again the next year to match the other $100,000. And the key is that no one wanted me to touch the Community Development Block Grant funding. It was like a sacred cow. And then when I showed Margie, I said, this is what's going to get us there. And I showed her the language, the legal language from HUD, that the Unified Development Code preparation is an eligible activity. That was it. We pushed it through the commission and got it done. And then we went out for proposals. We hired Duncan Associates out of Austin, James and Einsweiler, Lee Einsweiler. And a year and a half later, we had it done. But then there was a lot of rewrite, and it was a very controversial thing. And also, I was working on the trying to get impact fees set up here in this town, and one of the things that we failed in. I wished I could have got it done, but I retired after I was made an interim director of development services. I was still the director of planning. Barbara Bailey had just left, and I had been interim director now, for like a period of 8 months, and it was very stressful handling everything. And finally, there were some things that came up, and I needed to take some swift action to let a couple key staff, one key staff member go, and the manager asked me to back off. And so it was a building official, exactly. And because there was other investigations going on, and so even though Margie agreed with me terminating, and I did back off for the city manager, but then I was so annoyed by it that I finally set up another meeting with Margie and city manager Skip Noy, and said, if I won't be able to do the job that I do, then I need to. And he was advertising for a new director, and he hadn't chosen me as the new director, so obviously I wasn't the first one on his list, which was okay with me. But I also said that it's time for me to leave. I'm not going to hang around. If you want me as a director, I'll stay. But if I can't have the key people that support me, like a building official and division heads, then I've got no business being the director.
So since you retired from the city, you mentioned that you were hired back as a consultant.
Yeah. That Skip. When I left the city, it was on good terms. I didn't blow. I wasn't angry at anyone. I wasn't angry at Skip, Margie, and whatever. They're good people, and I was asked if I'd be interested in I had asked that. I said there's only two things I want before I retire. I want you to jump Shannon Murphy's pay to $50,000. Because he was making a lot less than that, minimum, $50,000. And done, Skip says. And second thing is that I would like to stay on as a contract to finish the rewrite of the Unified Development Code. Done deal.
Okay.
So I retired on January 5th. That was a Friday. Had a real nice retirement party and an evening social over at Webb's house, Ocean Drive. All my friends were there. And then when I woke up Saturday morning, I had a list of honeydews from my wife. And Monday morning, I was back at work.
Well, I was going to ask you what you've been doing since, but it sounds like that's what you've been doing. You done any traveling or anything like that?
Yes, in 2007, after we retired, we went to well, I hadn't retired yet, but we went up to Providence for my daughter's graduation, and I really liked it up there. It was good. But in 2007, we went to the Netherlands, and we went to Europe. My oldest son is in the Coast Guard. He's a commander in the Coast Guard now, stationed in Connecticut. He was a lieutenant in the Coast Guard stationed in Rotterdam. So we flew up to visit with him and the family, and he has 3 children now, but 2, and they were born in Antwerp, Belgium. But in Rotterdam, he got to travel the world. So they would, Coast Guard people there would fly out to different ports between all across Europe and North Africa. So when I went up to see Jason, and my wife joined me later on, he took me on some of his trips, so I got to go to Italy and France and stuff like that. Then my wife and I did our own trips. And then we gone back there. We went back another time to see him, and we did a longer tour. then I have a son, Dox, my third son, and he married a French lady who's a software engineer, and they live in Grenoble, France. So we go over there every 3 years, and he's got a family of 4. So yeah, that's cool. We still get back to Europe, and that's been pretty much the traveling.
Okay.
Other than going around the state, following the kids, my wife likes to go.
You've got grandkids too? Is that part of the trip?
Yes. They're mostly in town, but yeah, the French grandchildren, yes. There's a
Oh, that's
picture up.
yeah.
There's a picture up there on the wall. I have 13 grandchildren,
Okay.
and Annika has one on the way. So it'll be 14. I don't know whether to be ashamed or proud, considering the population is getting out of hand. But I had nothing to do with the grandchildren,
Well,
and there's a large family.
right. So we talked about your involvement in APA. Have you been involved in other organizations, civic, social, arts?
Well, I've been involved, not in a formal sense. I stayed involved. I try to stay involved with coastal habitat, groups, but not on a regular basis. I got into golf about 10 years ago, or 11 years ago, and I was vice president of Corpus Christi Golf Association up until last year. And I'm sort of backing off golf. I'm getting older, I'm 71 now. Another birthday coming up in a few months. And I'm not getting any better at golf. But I got really bored with retirement and not having nothing specific to do, and then I started getting calls from people in the community, developers and people. So basically I do my own consulting work, and I've got 2 projects I'm working on now. I finished up a couple of projects last week, and most of them involve me being a liaison between the builder or the developer and the city. And there's a lot of stuff that goes on, but I help them get through that whole process with a minimum effort. So from time to time I have to go to city council. So since I retired, I've taken about, 15 cases for rezoning to the city council, done a number, assisted with a number of final plats, got to the planning commission, and sort of worked with the local engineering companies and the plat preparation. So it's been fun. It keeps me active, and I want to get back to the Texas chapter meeting, but I haven't done that. I see we got one coming up, so.
Yeah, it's coming up in San Antonio.
Yeah, so I'm hoping to go up there.
So, you got any advice for a young planner who might be starting out their career?
I have advice for young planners, and one of them, do not shut the door. Learn what I mentioned earlier. When you are lucky and fortunate enough to get in with a good department, you do the best job you can, keep your eyes open, learn as much as you can, not just about planning, but other things in within a city that can impact the plan. So it's actually a wonderful job. It's a public service. Doesn't pay exactly a lot of money, but it does have its rewards in the long run. And if you're successful and you move up the ladder, you will be compensated accordingly. But it's one of those jobs that you can actually look forward to going. It's not always roses, but look forward to going to work every day. The variety of jobs that you get, the tasks, the assignments are never ending. A lot of times you may not have any background in what you've been assigned to do, but there's a challenge of learning. So it's a good future. It's great.
We've covered a lot of territory. Is there anything that you want to talk about that we haven't talked about?
If I do, I'll let you know. Wish my memory was better. I want to say I thank you for thinking of me. I haven't been in contact with all of you, but recently I connected up on Facebook, and I connected with all of you guys. Man, I got all kinds of new friends out there still.
Wonders of modern technology.
Yeah. but it's been a wonderful ride. I enjoy it.
Well, with that, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
all right.